Thank you for having us. I just wanted to take a moment before we actually shine the spotlight on the experts here. I wanted to just take a moment to thank you for your time and for the invitation to be here. My name is Amy Ruble, and I'm the legislative tribal liaison for the House Democratic Caucus. So I've had an opportunity to work with both of these legislators for a number of years. John, when he was first elected to the House, 18 years ago? 17 years ago. And then had the wonderful gift of having Debra Lekanoff be elected this most recent year. So we will really focus in on some of the work that they have been doing. But first, I wanted to chat with you a little bit around my excitement around this year's theme. When you think about relationships, reciprocity, rights, and resistance, this is really a microcosm of what happens in the legislature. So when you think about all those themes, when you think about the legislative process, there's an element of each of those that plays out in the legislative process. So when you add in the complexity of those concepts, plus the difficulty and the complexity of the government-to-government relationship, and then you add in the fact that you have elected officials who are trying to carry out policy, it becomes a very difficult waters to navigate. So I really do want to just honor the work of these two individuals and the complexities that they are dealing with as they carry out the important work of the legislative process. So with that, I would love to give them a chance to introduce themselves and to chat a little bit before we delve into some of the questions.
Well, good morning. It's good to see a number of you, a lot of friends here and others that I worked with. Again, I'm State Senator John McCoy, 38th Legislative District, which is Tulalip, Marysville, Everett. And a little bit about my ancestry. I am a direct descendant of Chief Seoth, and that's on my mother's side, and then I also married a Quina descendant. So through the Fairs, Elsie Fair was my dad's sister. So between that relationship and my wife's relationship, I'm related to half the Lummies. So we have a long history, and in fact, I've been here since Wednesday because we laid to rest one of our ancestors. That's who I am. We've got some great questions here that'll help answer some of your questions.
Hi, good morning. My name is Debra Lekanoff. My hereditary name is Hicks-Chasee. I am Thlinkit from Yakutat. I am Aleut from the Pribilof Islands. I have called the wonderful Northwest home for 17 years. I've worked and served the Swinomish tribe under Chairman Brian Clattersby, where my teachings has come from. I also graduated from the School of Hard Knocks, which comes from working underneath many tribal leaders, both our treaty tribes and our non-treaty tribes, but the 29 tribes of Washington State. Much of my teachings that brought me here not only came from the communities of the Salmon people in the Northwest, but it also came from the Native communities across this great nation, as I've worked with both ATNI, the affiliated tribes of the Northwest, and then National Congress of American Indians, where the Chairman Clattersby has served for many years. But it's also where I've learned my bearings of how to work tribal, state, and federal relationships. I'm honored to be here in Lummi Nation. It is, I am Thlinkit, so I am comes from a very much a warrior community and culture and background. Coming into Lummi Nation, it feels almost as if I come home often, and the people here have always been kind, treated me with much love. I have many friends here, and it's an honor to be in this House on the Homelands Illumination, and I'm happy to collaborate with Senator McCoy, who was one of my earliest teachers as I came into Washington State, and to work and collaborate with Amy, who is our tribal liaison in our House of Representatives, and who has also served 20 plus years under some great leaders in both tribal community and state community and local.
So as we get started, I did want to just share with you a little bit around my background and working as a tribal liaison. I've been with the House of Representatives for 20 years. I will say that when I had an opportunity to work with Senator McCoy, Sue Crystal, and Billy Frank, it changed the trajectory of my work. It changed the trajectory of my life. And so I am very grateful for having had the universe put me in a place where I had an opportunity to work with such great people. And I'm so proud to be sitting here at this table with them to also hopefully be a vehicle to help you understand the incredible work that they do in Olympia. So chatting with our first question, I would really like to delve into the government-to-government relationship, and which is a fundamental tenet of treaty rights and sovereignty. So I would like to ask both of you around the mechanics of how this actually works and the structure, and do you actually think that treaty rights and sovereignty are respected in Olympia and in government? Right.
Yeah, I've got quite a bit of history in this because before I got elected to the legislature, back in the mid-90s with Chairman Ron Allen of the Jamestown Squalum, we were on a national conference of state legislators committee that was being funded by the Kellogg Foundation. And that was to study state tribal relations throughout the United States. So is what we did, we traveled to, the majority of the tribes are in 18 states. And so we traveled to those 18 states and we studied how the tribes in the state work together. There were 18 different ways. Some were good, some were okay, and some were just horrible. So is what I noticed particularly was that we may have been sitting there talking about the same thing, but understanding the terms that each one of us were using were taken out of context because of the individual's background and how the definition of that word was being used. And so consequently, I'm mindful of this, and in fact, this came to light very bluntly with me when I came home to Tulalip after 20 years in the Air Force and 12 years working for Unisys in Washington, D.C. I came home and I was in the tribal council's chambers having a conversation, and then all of a sudden my first cousin threw a nickel at me. And I turned and looked at him and I said, "Why in the hell did you do that?" And he said, "You used a word I didn't understand." And I said, "What?" And then the chairman, he said, "Yeah, you use a lot of words we don't understand." And so I had to fall back and think hard about what I was going to say and try to relate into the definition that they were used to. So there I was learning how to walk in two worlds, how to communicate in the white privilege world, and then how to communicate in the Native American world. And the dress codes were different. I got beat up a lot because I showed up in tribal chambers in a suit. I was told to dress down. You're at home now. So I had a re-education process. So I see that the biggest problem in state-tribal relations is understanding the different definitions in order to communicate an idea. So I see that in the legislature. So in essence, is what Deborah and I are going through is that we have to speak like we would in our normal Native community, and then I'll change my language. If I was to go into Bellingham, Marysville, or Everett, that language changes a little bit. And then when we show up in the legislature, that's another language. So that's what we have to do. We're continually translating what we're doing in order to communicate properly with whoever we're working with on the subject. So we're supposed to have knowledge of everything. So we're jacks of all trades, but a master of none. So.
And I have to agree with the senator. When I first started working in state, tribal, federal relationships, it was learning how to walk in two worlds and to use the correct terminology based on where your setting was. You know, even to this day, sitting in the senator's chambers, he's explaining to me that words matter. Your terminology matters where you're sitting and who you're sitting and engaging with. And common terminology is very important. In the state legislature, even today, after how many hundreds of years of common languages, John, after serving 20 years, John, just about, in the 17 in the state legislature, we're still trying to define what a federally recognized tribe is to the state. We're trying to define what a treaty tribe is. You know, I came in as a young freshman looking to use a specific terminology that came from Indian country. And John took that teaching moment to engage with a freshman representative to say, this is a language we use here. Continuity, streamline, and common definition in languages is important. And you know what? John was right. John was right. This language is quite different down in the state legislature. I think one of the most important monumental moments that we're learning down there today is that as we grow into our leadership as being the two Native Americans, one in the House and one in the Senate, and now we can applaud and say we have two in both chambers, John and I are better able to collaborate on those relationships to move bills through, and we do it together. And I think that's what we do and what we bring forth down in Olympia. And with Amy's help navigating through the different layers of leadership, she too is learning to speak all three layers of language at the local, state, and the federal level. So words matter. Teaching moments matter.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you guys were able to accomplish this session. There were several bills that you guys worked on that were reflective of that government-to-government relationship that also impact Indian country. So I would like to give you a chance to talk a little bit around it. So Senator McCoy, I'd love for you to talk a little bit around the Native American Voting Rights Act and also the Indian Health Improvement Act.
Those two pieces of legislation, the Native American Voting Rights Act came out of what happened in North Dakota. That was pretty egregious. And one thing I say about state-tribal relations in Washington State, I tell everybody that I talk to that Washington State has the best state-tribal relations in the United States, but it's got a long way to go. Mm-hmm. So the education never stops. The education never stops, so we have to continue to work. So I don't know who, when I was talking with staff, I said, I don't know who's gonna follow me or Representative Lekanoff, we don't know who's coming after us. So we need to set legislation to prevent what happened in North Dakota and happening here in the state of Washington. So that's why that bill was created. And we had the help because the Native American Rights Fund, they had traveled around the United States taking input from all the tribes, well, as many tribes as they could throughout the U.S. to discuss that problem. And so they had noted, and when asked, they were more than happy to come to the state of Washington to testify because they felt that we would be the most successful state in getting that passed. So, you know, bills take anywhere from 2 to 3 terms to pass. That one was one of the fortunate, it only took one. So the legislative process, you never know when you're going to have a hard time getting a bill passed or when it's going to be easy. You never know, because the bills you think are so simple that it should move, and it'll take you 12 years to get it passed. And that was the what Deb's going to talk about, the D-hat. It took me 12 years to get the T-hat passed. So, so moving into the Indian health improvement, they first came to me 3 years ago and had an outline of what they would like to see in the legislation. And I informed them, I said, well, you got a lot of work to do with the governor's office because you got to get him to sign it. So you need to get his buy-in first. So I said, we'll craft a bill to get the conversation started. And then it might be a session or two in educating one another on what you really want to get an effective bill passed. And that's what happened with this bill. There was a 1.5 years worth of negotiations between the Indian Health Board and the governor's office, and they hammered out a process that was acceptable to both. And originally, the bill did not contain mental health language, but after this bill got moving, they came to me and said, we need mental health, so let's have a separate bill on that. I told them that was going to be difficult, but you know, I'll introduce it and we'll see what happens. And then the committee that handles mental health, they got to look at it and say, oh, let's just roll it into your Indian Health Improvement Act. So that's what we did. So we got everything we wanted, and so that's what happened on that one. But again, it was that 1.5 years of discussion with the governor's office to understand what they were after to get this passed.
Great. So Deborah, I'd love for you to chat a little bit around the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Act and the dental therapy bill that John referenced, and then also some of the work that you've done on oil transportation.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm going to conclude a little bit and expand on the Indian Health Improvement Act. Also with the work and the relationship that John has had with Speaker Chop. Speaker Chop, after 21 years of serving the longest, as being the longest speaker to serve in the United States, came across with his first bill. And that was the Behavioral Health Bill, which is looking to invest in building the workforce in the next 10 years through the University of Washington. With the relationship that John had created and the relationship I'd had with Speaker Chop, the Behavioral Health Bill now also has a cultural component to it that says you can learn through Western science to heal, but you also need the cultural teachings embedded in that. That is a welcomed, that was a welcome amendment to the Behavioral Health Bill. It also ties to the long years that John has built in relationship building with the Washington State and understanding how important culture is when we're healing our own people. 41% of the people who have mental health disabilities come from Indian country. It's astounding, and we are now part of a larger workforce development. They are also reaching out to Northwest Indian College to say, if we're going to be teaching down at the University of Washington how to heal Washington State and rebuild that workforce, let's also include that relationship with Northwest Indian College. So we are also creating that opportunity to walk in two worlds. Moving through to the missing and murdered Indigenous women. That is one of the most heartfelt, monumental pieces of legislation that we can move through Washington State. Last year, we moved a large piece through that looked at increasing the funding, the relationship, and finding the data gaps for not only missing and murdered Indigenous women on the reservation, but also in the urban areas. We in Indian country always reach out and we reach our hand across, no matter where you come from. If you look like me, we're going to take care of you. And that's what the first bill in the murdered and missing Indigenous women did last year. This year, it created 2 liaison positions on the east side and the west side with Washington State Patrol. It provided an opportunity to find the continuity in process and structure. Oftentimes, we were finding at different levels of government, there are different processes on how to address that situation. The underlining tone of this year's bill was to build trust. It was to create trust and relationships between the Washington State Patrol, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, the federal level, and the tribal level, and how do we create that continuity? We know in Indian country, some things are just left unsaid, and that's how we address it. This is opening up a new door to say we can no longer hide, and our victims don't have to feel ashamed. We can open the door and find ways to say, I need help. The dental health funding, as the senator had alluded to, it took many years. Chairman Clattisby had collaborated with the senator and many other tribal chairs to try and move this bill through. We were able to be the first state behind Alaska to be able to, in Indian country, address those important health aspects of allowing tribal people to have dental health therapy services on the reservation, and we're working towards expanding that for next year. John, did you want to maybe talk about one of the biggest challenges I think we faced as we worked on that bill?
Yeah, the biggest opponent that we had on the DEF bill was the Washington State Dental Association. They fought us tooth and nail all the way through it. Every year they would come into my office to try to convince me that the bill wasn't needed. And my response to them was always, when you show up on a reservation or in rural areas, then I'll quit pushing this bill. They're still not here, but we have the DHAP program going. But that's what it was about. The Dental Association viewed the legislation as an incursion of their scope of work. That's how big of a reach they were. So they were willing to sacrifice the rural and reservation areas over a scope of work, in their mind, a scope of work.
So with that, moving into the following up on the dental health bill this year provided $7.1 million in funding returning back to the tribes, with that funding going into providing the training for other tribes across the state to be able to create their own DHAP programs. Lummi Nation is one of those tribes. In fact, my new friend here tells me her daughter is returning from the DHAP program and will be providing those services to our tribal people. There's no reason why a child should not be proud to smile. The oil transportation, many of us know since the Cherry Point terminal was turned away as one of the largest coal terminals in the United States, we raise our hands to the work of Lummi Nation and to the 3 treaty tribes that worked on that along with them, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Swinomish, and then the 20 treaty tribes across the state. The oil spill bill is directly related to that. We started recognizing that we need to create prevention preventive measures within the Salish Sea to protect our communities, our treaty rights, our quality and our way of life today and in the future. And the only way we could do that is to provide those services and those requirements and regulations that help protect that. We are looking presently right now at an increase of almost 571 vessels coming from the Roberts Bank cargo terminal up at Tawasin. With this oil spill prevention bill, it looks like doing a better assessment and modeling of what the vessel traffic is going to look like in the Salish Sea, of when enough is enough on the Salish Sea, and how do we measure the carrying capacity. It also provides 2 oil spill response locations, one in Rosario, which we know has been deeply impacted by the storms. The fishermen have shared with us that coming through that area is getting more and more challenging and more narrower. I don't know if I said that word, smaller. And also taking a look at Haro Straits. The amount of ships coming through Haro Straits, 70% of them come from Canada. We want to be able to create that relationship through the Coast Salish Gathering, the Salish Sea Institute, to bring Canada to the table and those industries to help pay for putting a spill response and a tugboat towing in that area. 70% of the ships coming through Haro Straits are from Canada. So we felt and believe as state officials that it's not on the backs of Washington state taxpayers to pay for that, but we also know at the end of the day, if we have to do it, we have to do to protect that area, we'll do it, just because that's who we are. Just quickly in closing on this question period, when I came down to Olympia, you kind of wonder how the mechanics work. How does John know what I'm running? How do I know what I'm going to run on bills? How do we collaborate? Being a Native American woman and being someone who knows when you come into the Longhouse, when you come into potlatches, you start here at this level on your responsibilities. Being able to sit in the senator's chambers and work through what is it that he's been working to accomplish, what is it I was looking to accomplish in what came out of my district in the House, and really guiding through and determining what our work plan is, and then leaning to Amy to help us maneuver through the politics in the House side. So it really takes a team approach, and recognizing your teachings and your elders, regardless if you're a state official or working within a tribe or working within an organization, I think has helped us succeed on where we are today. So following John's lead and always having a teaching moment is important for me and my leadership in the House.
So after, these are some of the highlights that we were able to really wrap our arms around and tackle this session. There are several other monumental and critical issues that are still out there that need more work and that need our attention. And I want to highlight the 2 champions that are here who have done a lot of work on these issues, and we'll continue to work on them as we move forward. I would love for them to chat a little bit around the culverts, salmon and orca recovery, climate change, and of course the ever-present issue of water.
We don't have enough time to cover one of the but to try to quickly go through them, culverts and water are never-ending battles. Culverts is very expensive, and so consequently we got to figure out a way to get the state more money so they can do the culverts. It's a big ticket item. Through the lawsuits the tribes have brought against the state and continually to run, in order to fix all the culverts in the state, every year the state brings in approximately $53 billion. To fix the culverts will take more than half that. So consequently, all other services will go wanting if we just do culverts. So that would not be equitable, because If we starve one, it comes back to haunt us every time, because those problems will grow. So we have to figure out how to balance this out, and how do we get revenue to be able to make these changes in culverts. I fully support it, and I want it to happen, but I can't see starving half the state in order to get the job done. Like I said, we'll only turn around those problems only escalate, and then we got a bigger problem. So I'm with a group of legislators that would like to make changes to the taxing system in the state so that the middle and lower incomes are not carrying the tax burden. We should have a tax system where everybody participates so that we can work these issues. On the salmon and orca recovery, Debra's done a lot of work. I let her take that subject because I had other things to do. We can't do everything, but we can, share the workload and help each other and get a lot of work done. So I'll let her talk more about that. Climate change, that one is another one with a lot of hard work. I carried most of the legislation over the years, starting in the House and then into the Senate. And sometimes letting something go and let someone else pick it up helps get it accomplished. And so that's what happened on climate change. I was doing the majority of the work on that when I was in the House, and then over in the Senate. And then we had others that wanted to do that work, and I said, fine, you can do it, I'll help you. And so they were able to accomplish that. So, and that's another thing. For whatever reason, there might have been a messenger problem with me in why folks weren't understanding what I was trying to accomplish. But then when we brought in others to do the work, then everything was fine. So that's okay, as long as we get it done. Because eventually everybody understands who did the work and when. Water is the essence of life. So consequently, this will never go away. Everybody needs water. And as natives and understanding Mother Earth, we understand that water is for everybody. Therefore, it should be free. Right now, it is free, but when you get a bill from your local municipality, there's a charge on there they just put water. Well, it's water conveyance is what you're paying for. You're paying for the pumps and pipes to get that product to your faucet in your house. That's what you're paying for. The water is free. You're not paying for that. So in the 40th district, Debra's district, there's a lot of wars going on over that. And now she gets to co-chair that committee and to help try to resolve that issue for the Skagit Valley. The Yakimas, they just finally, the judge finally signed off on an adjudication that went for about 35 years. So it was just, he signed off on it, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So there is a model that we can take a look at and follow. The agreement in Walla Walla watershed is a fairly decent one, and they still have some work to do on that, but it sets up a process that could be followed on how to work on water issues. So again, water will never go away. And when a law student stops me in a hallway and says, which career should I go into? I immediately say, water. You can retire on water. So, Deborah.
Yes, Salmon Recovery and Orca Recovery, it's been one of the most monumental historical times in Washington State. We all are sitting here with our beautiful mama orca back here behind us, reminding us that when the orcas are gone, we're not far behind them. When the salmon were gone, the orcas suffered. When the orca is leaving, it shows that we as who call this place home and walk this earth are not far behind them. Cool, clean water, clean habitat, and also healthy and strong regulations to protect those resources that are so important to all of us, whether it's important to us culturally, whether it's important to us historically, or whether it's important to us economically. I'm going to pause for just a moment. When I first came from Yakutat and I started working for the Swinomish tribe, I'd come just very excited. I grew up in a small town of 300 where to walk on the beach was my grocery store. We had salmon every day. We had an abundance of seafood, clean seafood. When I came to work for the Washington tribes, I asked them, where's your salmon? Where's your salmon? Where are your clams? Where's your crab? Where are they? And with tears, the Washington tribe said, we're living in a pollution-based economy and we're losing them faster than we can keep them. And today, 17 years later, that same story holds true. There's a great man in Lummi Nation who taught me something that I take down to Olympia, and this is what guides me in the work that we're doing in salmon recovery, whether it's hatcheries, whether it's habitat, whether it's regulation, whether it's healthy, clean lifestyles. When you have a healthy salmon, you have a healthy state. If you look at the salmon holistically around it, if you have a healthy salmon, you have cool, clean water, as the senator told us. You have a clean habitat, which is healthy for our human health. You have a healthy social structure. People are eating healthy and clean foods. You have a healthy economy. Washington State was the salmon state way before it was the apple state. But you also have a sustainability of how to bring economies together with a healthy salmon. Randy Kinley had told me, you can come here and you can live here amongst us, but don't tell us what to do because we in Lummi Nation and my fellow tribes around us know what we need to be sustainable. And I never forgot the teachings that Randy gave me. This year in Washington State, we're walking two worlds. We're preserving the wild salmon, and we're also creating those practices that our people need to be able to fish salmon through hatcheries. I believe over $21 million was provided for hatcheries this year, 14 million of it going to tribal hatcheries. I alone provided a capital budget proviso that brought $720,000 to Lummi Nation's alone operations and management, because we too not only need to feed the orcas, but we need to feed our people who call this place home. Salmon recovery has a long ways to go, and it'll always be a topic of concern and priority for me in Washington State and for my colleagues. They had said in the House, Senator, gosh, we'd never heard salmon so much since John was here. So John is speaking the salmon language and teaching on the Senate side, and I'm teaching on the House side. And together we're building Washington State's priority back into investing into salmon and recovery. Climate change was a really hard issue this year. We saw so many people come to us from the other side and say, we're not quite sure we want to talk about climate change and why are we investing in it? It's just going to kill the workforce, kill the economy, and we're still here. We're fine. And we came back and said, we're not quite sure what you want to call it, but it's happening. We're not going to fight over a name. We're going to build the workforce, build the economy, find the science to get the work done, and we're going to grow Washington State to be one of the greenest states possible. We passed some of the strongest climate change bills in the nation. To be able to come away from those clean energy grids that that have coal as their resource, to be able to say in Washington State, we will no longer allow coal burning infrastructure and heating and electricity to come to Washington State is important. But it's also important to find a workforce to help those people who are suffering. Washington State may stand alone, but we're surrounded by other economies that also impact us. Two bills that I wanted to close on. I wanted to applaud the senator here. We worked on the H-2A bill, which was really important for us, for our immigrants who have come here and who come here to work in our farmlands and in our agricultural world. As the Native American and the first Americans of this great country, it's our country first. We are always one to say, if you're coming to our country, we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you're fed, you're treated well, you're paid as you should be, your children are taken care of, you have a place to live. I'll let John tell the story, and I honor the story he tells of why this bill was so important to him. And for me, sitting on the House side, why it was so important for me to carry it forward is I will not allow people to be treated in that way. It's not our Native American way of doing that. So with that, I want to have the senator maybe talk about the H-2A bill a little bit.
Well, the H-2A bill, for those of you that don't know, that is the process where ag producers can bring help from out of country into the United States, have them harvest the crops, and then send them back home. That's the H-2A program. Well, the reason I got interested in it was that when I was in the House, I was chair of a committee that had farm worker housing as part of the portfolio. Well, I had some folks come to me complaining about some living conditions at a farm in Skagit Valley. And so because it was part of the portfolio I had, I felt it was okay. I did let the legislators of that district know I was going in there to take a look at it. Well, they were not interested in coming in with me. So I went in alone to observe what the living conditions were, and I could not believe the conditions that they were living in. They were deplorable. For rooms that were only supposed to hold no more than 6 people, they had 12 to 14 people in them. You know, there were a lot of other things that made things really bad. So I didn't pass any legislation, but I kept asking questions of the state and of the producer. I just asked questions. And if I didn't like an answer, I'd rephrase it and ask again. And then pretty soon changes started happening. So the living conditions improved, their pay improved, and then after 2-3 years, those farm workers unionized. And they asked me to be there on voting day on whether they become a union. And they used the back of my truck to count the votes because the ag producer wouldn't allow them to count the votes on his property. So we went down the road to a elementary school in their parking lot to count the votes. It passed, and now they're unionized. And so other areas in the state are taking a look at what they did to do the same thing. Now, what's that got to do with H-2A? Well, because I was in there taking a look at the immigrant farmers issues, I kept seeing this other group of folks, and I said, who are they? And that's when I got exposed to the H-2A program, And I said, well, I wouldn't treat these folks like this, but it's a hell of a lot better than what you were treating these others. You know, so I had hoped that the state and the producers would take notice and start improving those conditions. Well, I was wrong. So consequently, I had some folks show up in my office and asked me to run the bill. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got the majority and I got the right pieces done. And the other part that I couldn't get, I will get in another year or two. So
I'll be right behind him. Be right behind him. The last bill, many of you, yes, sorry.
Mr. Senator John McCoy,
yes.
thank you for being here. When you talk about the culverts, the state, they're the ones that put the culverts in all
Yeah.
over the state.
Right.
They should be responsible to take care of them, not the people. That's my opinion.
Where does the state get the money to do that?
But they're the ones that put them in there.
Yeah. But the only way the state can function is through taxes. That's the only way it can function. The state does not have profit organizations. So their only revenue source is taxes or fees. Okay? I understand what you're talking about, and I have that conversation all the time. So yes, it's a state responsibility, but the state built those thinking that they were taking care of the people of the state of Washington when they built them. They were taking care of people, not fish. Okay? So now, as Debra alluded to, we're getting the state to think more about the fish rather than the people, because the people can take care of themselves, but the fish can't, because we're destroying their habitat. And so we got to take care of the habitat.
I'll wait for the questions.
The last piece of legislation I was going to share is, in the upper headwaters of the Skagit, we're facing one of the largest coal mines in state history. Washington State on the Skagit River. Skagit River is the only river in the lower 48 that produces all 5 species of wild salmon. Senator McCoy and I both did joint memorial resolutions this year. This is what we do together when we team up. We provided a resolution that was adopted by both in the state legislature and will be shared with Premier Horgan up in British Columbia that says we're going to protect the headwaters of the Skagit, and we're going to also look towards collaborating better together. Yesterday, the governor sent a letter opposing the mine and a deep concern about the timber, and John and mine's joint memorial will follow up soon, along with the First Nations from British Columbia, from the Coast Salish Gathering, and then also from the BC Regional Chiefs. So just a little bit of, as we put it, what we can better do together. So that's all I wanted to share, Amy.
Well, a little bit on that. This mining and timber operation, the headwaters of the Skagit is in Canada. And they're the ones that are looking at the permit to allow that to happen. And we're letting them know that because it's the headwaters of the Skagit that come into our state, we oppose any mining or timber operations in the headwaters.
So if we shift away from the issues for just a moment, I do want to circle back to the theme again to talk a little bit around relationships. Specifically, there is a challenge when you are an elected official that you are representing the legislative district, and there's a lot of different voices and there are a lot of different opinions that exist within that legislative district. Then you also add into the complexity of this relationship that many feel that you carry the responsibility of representing Indian country as a voice in the legislature. So I would like for the two of you to talk a little bit around how you balance those relationships. And Senator McCoy, you've been there for 18 years. I'd like to hear you talk about whether that relationship has grown or shifted or altered in your time. And then, Representative, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your perspective coming from working in Indian country and then shifting back to working as a legislator. What are your thoughts of those things?
When I first went into the legislature, it was pretty bad. It was down and outright open racism, and there were racist remarks all the time. They were on the floor, which was really painful. So I got a leg cramping. So I'm not one of jumping up and screaming and hollering. I prefer to quietly get things done. So I would work on them in the caucus room or in their office or in my office and let them know what they said was harmful and why. As Debra calls it, I use my teaching moments. And so I'd let them do that. And then when I needed to get, well, let me back up a little bit more. When I ran to get elected the first time, people asked me, well, you're an Indian, so how are you going to represent your district in Indian country? And I said, well, wait a minute. The issues with tribes and with your communities are the same. Health, education, and welfare. Those are the topics all the time. Well, the tribes have health issues, have education issues, and have welfare issues. So if I can solve it for the tribes, why can't I take that same process and solve it in your community? Or if I solve it in your community, I can take it to the tribe and solve their problem. So we get beneficial help both ways. So again, that backs up to the terminology used and how you convey that information to who you're trying to convince. The first time I ran, I didn't win, but the second time I ran, I did. And one of the things that I would say is that, when I was lobbying the place for the tribe, there was this caucus room all these guys go into where I thought I had the support for a bill to get passed, and they'd come out of that caucus room and I'd lost all my support. What the hell happens in the caucus room? I need to get into the caucus room to find out what the hell's going on. Now I'm chair of the caucus. So I know what goes on in there. And so it's a great place to be, and it's great to be the chair of that caucus. So again, it's working on the terminology and how you convey the information, and to ensure that you get universal definition of some of these words. We can't get there with all of it, so that's why we work hard like we do to translate what we're trying to convey to whoever we're talking with. And another thing that I do a lot of work on, again, is education. If I've got a very heavy piece of legislation to get done, I do a lot of educating. And that's when I met Professor David Wilkins when I worked on retrocession. As those of you that are in law enforcement and tribal governments, retrocession is putting criminal jurisdiction back to the tribes. Well, Washington did have a retrocession process, but it was very unwieldy. And so I set about the process to streamline that process and to allow tribes to be able to get their retrocession. And that's Professor Wilkins is with the University of Minnesota, quite interested in what I was trying to accomplish. And the dean of the Indian law section of the UW Law School told me, "You'll never get that passed. The people I know around this, they will not allow you to pass it." And I said, "Well, I'm going to give it my best." So I went through a session where I did a number of education sessions, bringing in everybody that would have anything to do with retrocession, which is a lot of people, and groups of people that you'd never suspect, but they're there. So at any one time, I had anywhere from 30 to 40 people taking one of these sessions in to get it done. It took me 2 sessions, but I got it done, and nobody thought I'd do it. So, so that was a great accomplishment, but that's how I take care of the very heavy lift bills, is having, during an interim, I'll hold anywhere from 2 to 6 education sessions for legislators and staff so that they understand what I'm trying to accomplish. And so consequently, doing that process has changed some of the flavor, well, most of the flavor of the legislature. They're not openly racist anymore, but they're still there. White privilege is the biggest problem, because white privilege is so ingrained in them, they don't even know that they're doing it. And you got to bluntly bring it right to their face and explain to them what they're doing. And then still we got some that won't believe it. So it'll always be there, but we can minimize it.
John's correct. You know, when he first started, he openly heard the comments on the floor, in the rooms, behind the doors, and in this year I faced the same thing, not only in my campaign, but also in the floor. And people don't recognize, I don't believe they don't recognize until they stop and they sit here and they look into the floor of the chambers of both the House and the Senate, that Washington state representation is truly becoming the people's house. It is truly becoming the people's house. As the only Native American woman to serve in the entire state legislature, as a Native American woman to come behind a woman in 1978 coming from Spokane tribe, as a woman coming from behind a woman coming from Nez Perce who served in Muckleshoot as Senator Kaufman. Racism is alive and well. To be told you need to pick between being Native or being an American, to be asked if they can touch your hair, to be asked if your skin is really that color. It's not that they do it intentionally. I truly believe that, is I see the question in their eyes of curiosity, of, you know, there are some where racism is just blunt. So tell me, if you come to my community, you can teach me how to eat a seal and flush a seal? You know, just the comments that come out that arise in a setting is something that we've all dealt with for a very long time as Native American people. But you tend to rise above it and you embrace them. You shake their hand and you get to know them and you bring them along with you. You turn the other cheek. It's what you do to get things done. I know it's difficult to hear, but you rise above it and you do not go down into their level of hatred. In the bills that are passing, that have come across this year, there have been more Native American bills, I think, that have passed in the state legislature than we've seen in a very long time. And I think John and I have been working well together in many years. In fact, I was part of his retro session trainings way back in a couple years ago when we passed that through. I would say to anyone else who was looking to be part of an elected office, be hopeful. Know that you belong no different than another person of another color or another culture belongs. Do your due diligence and learn from the elders in front of you. Take time to reach out to friends and say, how do we do this and how do we work on it together? Be fearless and be courageous. When I decided to run for office last year, there was a young man that I was talking to who came from Lummi Nation, and he was strong and he was fearless, and he said, if you can do it, I can do it. If you can do it, I can do it. I am serving people just as you're serving people. Our children are drinking the same water. We are playing the same sports. You and I grew up together. We all call this great place in the 42nd home. Tim Blue was extremely a powerful man who came from Lummi Nation, who said, just because I live on the reservation and I'm brown doesn't mean I can't do what everybody else is doing. I might actually be able to do it with you. Tim's leadership that he showed and taught me and the work that him and I did in Cherry Point was this. And we do this down in Olympia. It's not that we're looking to push anyone off of the table or get away from the table. It's sitting down and saying, I want to sit next to you. I have something to contribute. I have something to bring. I want to do this with you. So when Tim and I both ran, he helped me, he encouraged me, but for Lummi Nation, they should applaud the work that he's done. He has opened a door for many young men and many young women of color to say, I can be that too, and I matter, and I can rise above it. So I look forward to working in the state legislature this year. I look forward to running again in 2 years. I look forward to working with Senator McCoy and having those learning and teachable moments and really growing Washington State on what we could be.